We're going to remove the entire battery, and that's going to, first of all, disconnect the battery so we can work on it, and second of all, give us more room since the alternator is right there below the battery. So we have a 8mm socket, and we're just taking off both the negative and positive battery terminals. Now the battery itself is held in place down here with a little wedge, and so it's also an 8mm. So we're going to take our 8mm socket with an extension down here, and we're going to loosen this up. I already broke it loose. Okay, so this little wedge comes out. That's what holds the battery down. And with that out of the way, we'll be able to lift the battery out of the car. So once the battery's been removed, we have our battery tray here that we're going to take off. And so it has some more 8mm bolts. There's one here, and then there's 2 more here on the fender. And by removing those, we'll be able to get this tray out of the way and give us some more room to work. Now we'll remove this tray. Set it aside, and this will be a good opportunity to clean everything else up too. So there we have our alternator down there. And so we'll be accessing it from both the top of the car and the bottom. Right now I'm going to take the supercharger belt off. As you may know, the supercharger belt is its own system, and then there's an inner belt for the rest of the accessories. And so by removing the supercharger belt, we're going to be able to take the belt off of the alternator itself. So the tensioner is found on this side, on the passenger side. This is an aftermarket tensioner, but the factory one's in the same place. And so what we're going to do is just take our 1/2-inch drive breaker bar. We're going to put it inside here, and then by pushing down on it, it'll release the tension on the belt, and we can remove the belt. So now we're going to push down on this tensioner right here, and I'm going to use, instead of a breaker bar, I'm going to use one of these 1/2-inch ratchets, since it gives me the ability to move this around a little bit better and get a better angle on it. So I'm just going to place this into the front of the tensioner arm. So pull this radiator hose back in order to get your ratchet or your breaker bar in there. And make sure it's all the way in, because I've seen a lot of the factory arms break right here because they're not all the way in. So now as I push down on this, as I push down on this, you'll see that it will loosen up the belt system. And then we can just pull the belt off of one of these idlers with your other hand, and then release the tensioner back up. So once again, we just push down on this to give us the movement that we needed, and then pull the belt off. So with the belt removed up here, we can now take the belt off of the alternator's pulley. Okay, so next we'll lift the car into the air. It's actually better to do it on the driver's side, but the way that I have everything set up, I'll just do it from here. But I like to lift on the subframe connector, since this car has those. And then just make sure that the jack is also there to help support it. Okay, so we're into the car now. We're going to be looking at the alternator from the back side. And there's going to be a few things that we need to take off here. One's going to be this little boot here. Just pull it straight back. That's going to allow us to get onto the back of the power wire. Just pull it straight back till it pops off. Okay, and you'll see the power wire bolt right there. We'll be unplugging that connector over here as well. And that one's going to be pretty simple. Just push down right here on this tab part, and then pull it back off. So this is a 10mm socket that we're using. We're just taking off the power cable that's going from the alternator to the battery. Okay, so just twist back and forth until this power cable comes off. Okay, so this power wire is giving me a little bit of trouble here. It doesn't want to really come out. So another option is to take off this cap up here. I already popped it loose. And just get your 10mm socket, and you can also remove it from up in here. So we'll try that approach. Okay, so I took the 10mm nut off of up here, and the same concept, we'll just pull it off that way. But either way, this is going to be coming off of our old alternator. Remove the top alternator bolt with a 15mm wrench. Okay, so once again, this is from above where the battery was. That's how we're getting down to this one. Okay, we're actually going to put this top alternator bolt back in just a little bit, and that'll help hold it in place as we remove the bottom bolt and move it around so that we can get that electrical connector off. Okay, the bottom bolt is a 13mm, and so just take it out here, and it's the other part of the bracket that's holding this alternator on. And for the bottom bolt, I found it was easiest to use a wrench. I have a ratcheting wrench, which is pretty nice, but it seems to go on a little easier than a socket wrench. So as you can see, this lower bolt is also very long, and so you'll eventually be able to pull it out of the bracket as well. And we put the top bolt back in, so it's still being supported, but now we can move it around and try to get a better grip on this connector, this electrical connector we still need to take off. With the top bolt still in and the bottom bolt removed, you can see we can move the alternator a bit, and this really helped get it into a better position for us. And I just put the flathead screwdriver up on this tab up here and pushed down on it, and while doing that, I was then able to pull this connector off. So now we're disconnected from our alternator. There's a clutch cable going through here, and it appears that the bracket also was at one time connected to this alternator somewhere. Once again, this is already a remanufactured alternator that has failed, so whoever put this back on didn't put the other bracket back on. So anyway, with that all free and clear out of the way, now we can just remove that top bolt fully and pull the alternator out. Okay, we're going to have to loosen up the alternator brackets in order to get the alternator out. So this is our top bolt on the alternator here, and if you look slightly above it, right back in here, I can get a good picture of it. Okay, right back in here, there's a bolt right there where I'm pointing. It's an alternator bracket. Okay, so I'm taking the top alternator bracket bolt off up here, as you can see. I'm using a 10mm ratcheting wrench for this one. Okay, you can get this out by hand after you break it loose. It's kind of a tight squeeze. And there's also some below the car. So we're going to take off that one. And come in here below the car. So when you're looking at your lower crank pulley, right up in here, that's a bolt that we want to remove. That's the alternator bracket bolt. So there's one below down here, and then there's one up top. And so by removing those, we're going to be able to move the alternator bracket around. That'll help us get the alternator in and out a lot better. So with this bottom alternator bracket bolt out of the way, and the one from the top end over there, we can now move this alternator bracket and just kind of get it out of the way in order to drop the alternator out. So now we'll pull this top bolt out once again and make sure that this belt is off of the pulley, and then pull the alternator out of the car from the bottom. Okay, so the alternator is now free here, as you can see, from the top and the bottom, and the clutch cable kind of puts a little pressure on it. It goes through here, so as you pull that out of the way, just make some room down here, kind of by, here's the inside tire. That's where we're going to be able to pull it through. Just push gently these power steering lines out of the way, spread this out of the way, and then just pull it on straight back through. Okay, so now these brackets are out of the way. Biggest part is getting that alternator bracket kind of out of its way by undoing those bolts. So then just take your time, just kind of drop the alternator through here. I've seen a lot of people do it backwards, so we'll just kind of do it that way too. Okay, so the alternator is out. I really like this turtle wax bug and tar remover, and now is a good time to get down in the battery area where it's all gunked up and clean that up while you're down there. So here's the old alternator, and here's our new mech van that we're installing, and we won't go into too much detail here, but the original alternator is 105-110 amps, so it's really not that powerful. It's the same one that they use on the Mustang V6, and you know, when you're running twin pumps and upgraded fuel systems and sound systems and all that, it's a little much for it to handle. So I went with this one, which is the 240 amp, and they offer a 170 as well. That probably would have done the trick, but I went with this 240 in case I wanted to upgrade later down the road on some other modifications. But as you can see here, this system, even at idle, is going to be producing 147 amps, which is more than the other alternator does at its max output, and then a total of 248 amps up here. But anyway, it's a really good alternator. They've done a lot to help with some of the heat problems that the old ones suffer from, which is why I believe this one went out in the first place, because it was still working, but off and on, as if the power regulator had gotten fried or something. So anyway, that's why I went to the upgraded version. Okay, so I just lifted the alternator back up into its position, and although when we brought it out we kind of tilted it towards the bottom and went out, I found on this way I was able just to lift it straight up, just kind of with the pulley facing forward, just lift it straight up past those power steering lines and everything. So now that I have it up in place, I'm just putting the top bolt in, then we'll secure the bottom brackets. Okay, so as you can see down here where my thumb is, I'm just reinstalling this alternator bracket, putting on the 10mm bolt. Now I'm just coming in here with my 10mm wrench and reinstalling this front mounting bracket for the alternator that we took off earlier. Okay, so here's our lower crank pulleys, and once again I'm just coming over to our alternator bolt here. I just put it back in, And so once we have that bottom one and the top one in, it'll help hold the alternator bracket in place, and then we can continue to tighten up the alternator itself. Now make sure as you're tightening these up that you tighten the top one and the bottom one at the same rate. Don't crank this one all the way down and then go down and try to make the other one work. So get them both hand tight first before you tighten them down. So I've gone down to the bottom and I've made sure that it's snug. Now this one's snug. So now I'll start to tighten them both down with a hand ratchet. So now I'm down below here, tightening up the bottom bolt. So just make sure that the bolt comes in from the front of the car towards the rear of the car. That's how you know you tighten it up the correct way. So the kit came with an extended wire attachment, so that's all I'm doing here is just plugging this in the back where it belongs. You can see the way that it goes on with the clip on the top, where it's easiest to reach if you have to redo this for some reason. So just clip it in, and then we'll plug that down here. Okay, so here's the new one coming off of the alternator, and here's our factory one, and we'll just plug these two together as well. And they just plug together. Okay, so now we have our original power wire here, and we're gonna go ahead and put this on the back of our MechMan receiver, but we're also gonna do our big 0 gauge wire as well. Okay, so now we have our new power wire up top coming down, and then we have our old power wire on there as well. And so we'll just get our little nut and then tighten it all down. So now we're all tightened down with the factory wire and our new big 3 0 gauge one. So we can put this cover up over it. So now the alternator is connected down here by the power wire. Okay, so the belt is back over the alternator down there, and I just put it back how it goes. The easiest way, in my opinion, is to put the breaker bar on the tensioner and then wrap it over the belt first, leaving it over this pulley and this pulley, and then as you push down, then you can slide them under. But anyway, we're all ready to go here. Next, reinstall your battery tray. Remember, you had one bolt down here, which is the long one, and then 2 smaller ones here holding it to the fender. And then drop the battery in. Don't forget to put in your battery wedge tie down. And then from here, just connect your negative and positive terminals.